I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, advertising and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp, and I'm Giles Edwards, co-founder and MD. Today I've caught Harriet Minter. Journalist, broadcaster and badass woman, Harriet is a no-nonsense expert when it comes to female leadership, working from home and pissing off Piers Morgan. After a hugely successful stint at The Guardian, founding a first-of-its-kind Women in Leadership editorial section, Harriet's latest foray into writing, Working from Home, How to Build a Career You Love Outside the Office, is a bullshit-free guide to the new flexible workplace. If that wasn't enough, Harriet is also a radio host, two-time TED speaker, qualified coach, enthusiastic pottery student, and a doting mum to a rescue staffy. Harriet says, I wonder if maybe what we need to build bravery is not a series of successes, but instead a safe space in which we can fail. Harriet, welcome to the show.
Oh, what a lovely intro. Thank you for having me.
Good, awesome. Right, 7 quick-fire questions to start, Harriet.
Okay.
Mac or PC?
Mac, for reasons that I don't understand, and I don't know why I did it, and now I'm stuck with it.
Regretfully, Mac. Dogs or cats?
Dogs, always.
London or Liverpool?
Oh, what a city choice. I'm going to have to go London, although my mum is from the Wirral, so she's going to be really angry with me for that.
High heels or big boats?
Big boats. I put my back out last year. I've had to retire the heels.
Bake Off or the Pottery Throwdown?
Pottery Throwdown. It is the best thing on TV. I love it.
Right, 2 more. Ask for permission or ask for forgiveness?
Ask for forgiveness.
Yes.
Yeah.
And finally, Piers Morgan or Morgan Freeman?
I mean, if we're saving them from drowning, probably Morgan Freeman.
If you had to choose. Awesome. Cool. Nice one. Easy. Well, thanks for joining us, Harriet.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
To kick things off, can you start by telling us what your first ever job was, potentially pre-school, pre-college, pre-uni, and then what you regard to be your first, inverted commas, proper job that set you on your career path?
Sure. So my first job, which is sort of the first thing I did for which I was paid money. So I had things like, I was very into horses when I was one of those like classic country horsey girls. So I used to go and muck out stables in return to be able to ride the horse and stuff like that. But the first thing I did for money, I was a waitress in the local cafe of my local village. It was called the Lemon Tree. And there were basically like 5 cafes in this village town. And you had to start at the Lemon Tree because it was the one that paid the worst. The owner was known for throwing things at people. It was just a horrible, horrible place to work. But if you hadn't worked there, none of the other cafes would take you on. So the Lemon Tree was just constantly staffed by kind of 14-year-olds on, I think it was £2 an hour. It was terrible, but it did teach me that however bad work is, it's not that bad.
Yeah. I bet the other cafes were a breeze in comparison.
They're a delight. And then I guess my first proper job, the one I had after university, I was a receptionist. I always say this is actually the time in my life when I felt the richest. I was a receptionist. I was earning 24 grand a year, which in 2004 was a pretty good wage. And it was for a private equity company. And they used to do things like they'd buy us, you had a £10 lunch voucher. So if you were really smart, you could order from M&S. So I used to, age like 22, used to do my weekly shop from M&S. And they would have like twice a year, they'd take all the support staff, which is what the secretaries and receptionists were called, on like jollies to Europe, which was very nice. And they'd take us out for dinner all the time. So I had like this very weird first proper job where I remember in my annual review, they said, "I'm really pleased with how you've done, Harriet, and on all the criteria, you have scored 5 out of 5. However, there is an area for improvement." And I said, "Oh, okay, I'm so sorry. How can I improve? We would like to see you wearing more lipstick." I was like,
Hmm.
okay. Yeah. So that was my first, I guess, proper grown-up adult job. I did that for a year.
Cool. But you mentioned there you did go to university. The reason
Yeah.
why we like to ask our guests how their careers start is because I think there is understandably a pressure and a level of anxiety that young folk tend to have about doing things the right way.
Mm.
And I think someone's right way can well be via university, but equally it's not necessarily the only way and certainly shouldn't be regarded as that.
Yeah, so I mean, actually, when I left school, I wasn't going to go to university. So I was, and which was sort of horrifying to my parents because all they wanted, neither of them went to university, and all they wanted was for me to go. And I sort of got to the end of my A levels and was like, I'm just never want to study again, never want to pick up a book again, never want to think about any of this again. I've had enough. And so I got a temping job. I was living, my family are from Kent, so I was living in Kent, and I got a temping job because I could type in London and would do like a 2.5 hour commute every day. And I saved all my money and just took myself off to Australia and ended up working as like working my way around Australia. Had like a sort of a slightly stupid moment where I just lost a load of money in a casino and then had to go and get a job really quickly. And so had a series of like dodgy temping jobs. And the last one was for a mortgage company called Rams Home Loans. This was like at the height of the dodgy mortgage boom, right? Rams Home Loans. And every new employee got a pair of fluffy sheep slippers. I remember that. And they were going to sponsor me to stay in Australia. And I had this moment where I was like, do I stay in Australia and this would be my job and maybe I'd work my way up, but it's kind of going to be it? Or I can go back to the UK. But if I go back to the UK, there's absolutely no way my parents are not going to let me get away with having a peaceful life and not going to university. And I think at 18, I'd sort of had done a year, or 19, I suppose it was then, done a year of work. And I was like, God, it's actually quite hard work, working every single day. Who knew? Might be quite nice to go and doss about at university for 3 years. So I took myself back off to university. But I have to say, I mean, I did it at the point where it was £3,000 a year. If it was now, I think it's now £9,000, isn't it? £9,000 a year. I'm not sure I would do it. I would have done it then. I would do it again. I would definitely go back. I'd love to go back. I'd love to earn enough money that I could just be like, right, this is it, done. I'm retiring and I'm going to go and study all the things I want to study because I loved the actual studying of my degree. But I don't think I would do it at 18, I have to say.
No, to be honest, I echo that point precisely about the fees in particular nowadays. It just seems prohibitive, and I'm not sure that kind of fair exchange in value is quite there. But I'm sure that's me going off my own experiences of going to a degree that, to be honest, was highly flawed after a foundation diploma that was quite the opposite. So,
Well, this is it, right? You know, it's sort of it's like the thing that I loved about university. I did a politics degree and I loved studying it, and I found the topic really fascinating, and I learned about things I would never have picked a book up on otherwise. And I made some amazing friends. I had a great time. You know, I partied for 3 years, which was fantastic. And now that I'm old and, you know, can't really go out without having to stay at home for a week afterwards, I'm really glad I had that.
yeah, oh no, I totally agree.
I had like 4 hours of contact time a week. It
Yeah,
wasn't really like on a kind of teaching to receiving time. It wasn't really worth the money, I have to
no,
say.
yeah, no. I think the value from university, exactly as you say, comes from everything else other than the studying part. It
Yeah.
is life, it's friends, it's learning independence, and
Yeah,
yeah, no, for sure,
absolutely.
absolutely. Just quickly, favorite place in Australia?
Oh,
I've got family east and west side, so I quite like to see which side you land.
so I mean, I loved Sydney. If I was moving there, I would have stayed in Sydney. But in terms of like the bit that just sort of blew my mind, it was Ocean Road. And that was seeing I think it's the sisters. But seeing the rock formations, the size of the waves, feeling really like you're on the edge of the world.
Mm.
That was the bit that I was just like, wow, I can't.
So it's a special place. And then how did you end up at the Guardian? So I think we're skipping forward a few years here.
Oh, you're asking for quite a few years. So basically, I am something of a blagger when it comes to jobs. So I was working as a receptionist, and while I was working as a receptionist, I was also studying for a law conversion course because I had done a politics degree, which is really fairly useless. And so I thought what everyone thinks when they've done a fairly useless degree, which is maybe I'll be a lawyer. So I was studying in the evening for that, and I realized quite early on that that was a massive mistake, and I was never ever going to want to be a lawyer. But I used to read this very funny website. It was just at the point where people were starting websites as a kind of as a thing, as opposed to something you just do automatically. And I used to read this funny website which basically took the piss out of the legal profession. And one day they were advertising for people to come and work with them. And I thought, oh, that sounds quite fun. I'd quite enjoy that. So I sort of sent them an email basically saying, I don't have any of the required qualifications, and really I don't know anything very much about the law, but right now I'm on track to be a lawyer, and I think this might be a terrible mistake. Please save me. And they emailed me back and were like, you don't have any of the required qualifications, but we thought your email was quite funny. Come in and have a meeting with us. I had honestly the worst job interview I think anyone could ever have, ever. Can I remember sort of one bit of it, which was that my subsequent boss asked me, because I used to write reviews on law firms. He said, if you were to go and work for any law firm, which one would it be and why? And I had this complete blank, and I could not have named a law firm to save my life. And then finally, this name popped into my head, and I thought, oh, yes, I'd go and work at Freshfields because, and then I reeled off a load of stuff that could have applied to any company in any industry anywhere in the world. And in the back of my head, I thought, I've got to think of something really specific here. And I said, and they've got an office in Newcastle, which is where I went to university. I've got an office in Newcastle, and I think that shows a really interesting approach to regionality in the UK. And my boss just looked at me and went, no, they don't. I went, yeah, they do. And I would have sworn on my mother's life at that point that they did. And he was like, no, they don't. And I know that for a fact because my wife works there. It's like, oh my God, no. And I just left this interview. I was completely devastated. I was just thought, this is awful. And anyway, the next day I ended up sending them like a huge piece of cardboard in their company colors with articles I'd write for them, ideas for the website. You know, they had a things to do at the weekend section, all of that. And then in the middle, 10 reasons to hire me that I forgot to mention yesterday. And then I put this title on it, which said, job application part 2. Sorry, I screwed up, but can we start again? And I couriered it over to them on the work account of the company I was then working for, and didn't hear anything for 2 weeks. And then I just got this email going, go on then, you got the job.
Oh,
And that was
amazing.
it. And so I worked for them for 5 years at the start of the kind of like online publishing world. So I worked for them at the time when, you know, really like blogs were suddenly becoming a thing that you could make money from. And I learned about online publishing. And then the 2008 crash happened, and I was sort of looking for another job and nothing was coming up. And I used to apply for stuff at The Guardian all the time, never ever heard back. And one day I got this email saying, you know, we'd really like to invite you for I'd like to invite you for an interview. And I swear to God, I did not know what they were interviewing me for because I'd applied for so many jobs and they don't tell you which one it is that they're interviewing you for. So I was like, oh my
You don't
God.
want to ask.
Exactly. Don't be like, I'm really sorry. So I was basically subsequently found out that it was to be the careers editor for them. And I went to this interview and I'd just been dumped. I'd had a row with my boss. And I remember just thinking, I have to get this job. I have to get this job. And what I didn't realize was that the guy interviewing me was actually from the commercial department. And so I, reeled off all my great editorial ideas and what I was going to do and who I'd interview and how it would work and how I'd build a community for them and all this jazz. And then at the end of it, he was like, so what has, working in online publishing taught you? And I said, well, it's taught me that if you're a website and you're not making money, you're doing something wrong because it's really, really easy. And ironically, at that point, The Guardian was losing like 50 million quid a year. So his eyes lit up and he was like, haha, this is a journalist who speaks my language. And that was how I got the job, basically. And I was there for 6 years.
And what were your roles during those 6 years?
Oh my God, I did a lot of jobs.
All the ones
So I
you
was
had
the
applied
careers,
for.
yeah, pretty much. I was the careers editor for, I think, literally 3 days. And then they were like, actually, we sort of hired you under false pretenses, because what we actually thought was, when they came in, they got me to pitch an idea for a kind of fictional news section of the site they were going to start. They were like, we liked your pitch so much that we thought actually you could start that for us, but we couldn't get the budget to create a new role. So we had to hire as the careers editor instead. So then I wrote about local government for them. Then I wrote about, she thinks, culture, media. Then I went and did editorial strategy for their law section. Then I did what we call community engagement, which was basically how do we get more people reading online. And then I was a launch editor. So then basically somebody else would come up with another idea for a different section, and I would help work out what's going to be the strategy for it, who do we need to run it, what are we going to, like, what targets are we going to set for it, how are we going to make it happen, get it up and running. And then I would go on to another project. And I did loads of those. And then one day I came into work and I realized I'd run out of things to launch. And I sort of, potted around for a bit and thought at some point somebody's going to realize that I'm not doing anything. So I should probably fess up to this now. Saw my boss and was like, I need to tell you I don't really have anything to do. And he said something like, you'll learn in your career that there are busy times and there are quiet times. And when things are quiet, you should just make the most of being quiet. Which really totally explains how The Guardian was losing 50 million quid a year. And, and that's just not really in my nature, right? So I kind of went around and stuck my nose into lots of things. And I realized, I feel like there is this trend happening, which is that whenever we write, or whenever The Guardian wrote anything about women in leadership and women in work, it did really well, but it was very sporadic. It just, there was no kind of strategy behind it. And as a woman who's interested in publishing and who reads all the papers and the magazines, I also realized that when I went out for dinner with my girlfriends, 75% of our conversation was about work. But if I picked up a magazine for me, it was 99% about what I looked like and who I was dating. And then there might be one page about work. And so I pitched this idea to my boss, which is that we should have a section which just focused around women and work. And I always have to caveat this story by the fact my boss comes out of it really badly, but he was actually a very good guy. So I pitched this idea to him, and I remember pushing across the table this beautiful pack that I'd created as to why we should be doing it. And it had spreadsheets and graphs and all this cool stuff that I don't really understand in it. And he literally just looked down and he went, "No, I don't think so," and pushed it back across the table. And I was absolutely furious, because not because he'd said, a little bit because he'd said no, if we're being honest, but mainly because he hadn't really given it consideration. And so I did that thing that you should obviously never do when you're angry at your boss, which is sort of go around the company and tell everyone how angry you are at him. And in doing that, I caught up with a woman who works in our events team, and she was like, I've been trying to put on an event about this for years and years and years. We should team up and do this together. And we'll put on an event and we'll book some space out and we'll get together a panel, and we just won't really tell anyone about it. And if it's a success, then great. And if it isn't, we'll just deny all knowledge. And so we put this event on, and it sold out in 48 hours. And when it had sold out, I said to my boss, look, I have sort of done this thing, and I know that you're not into it, but please, please, please come to the event. And if you don't like it and you don't get it, I promise I will never mention it again. And so he came, and afterwards I said to him, what did you think? And he said, yeah, it was really good, really enjoyed it. But there was one thing that was a bit strange to me. I said, oh, okay, what's that? He said, well, at the end, I really wanted to ask a question, but because I was the only man in the room, I felt like I couldn't. Is that what it's like to be a woman? I sort of said, well, yeah, actually, yeah, sometimes that is what it's like to be a woman. And he said, oh, okay, I get it now. Yeah, you're right. We should do this. And 6 weeks later, we launched a section on The Guardian's website called Women in Leadership, which just talked to women about their working lives, and was the first, and I think still is the only national newspaper to have ever done that. So I'm very proud of that. And I did that for about 3 years, I think, 3 or 4 years. I only meant to start it and then move on and do something else, but I kind of fell in love with the topic and I stayed. And then, I ended up going freelance, which I've been doing for 4 years now, 5 years. I completely lose track of the time. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, especially at the moment, there's less to kind of
Exactly.
pronounce where
Nobody
we
knows.
are, isn't it, with the pandemic on. But going back to your women in leadership, then I read that at one point you had over 150,000 unique users each month, 13,000
Yeah.
subscribers, so hugely successful. It wasn't just a
Oh,
first of its
yeah.
kind; it was a first of its kind, and brilliantly successful.
I think it was at the time, I don't know what's happened now, but at the time it was the most successful launch The Guardian had ever done. And it was miraculous. I think there are bits in everyone's career which we look at and we go, wow, I can't quite believe I ever did that. It was miraculous for lots of reasons. So it gave me, I've always been a generalist, and actually it gave me something that I was really passionate about. It changed people's lives, and people still email me today and say, just really want to thank you for doing that, and you taught me this, or I've got a pay rise here because of that, or actually I owe you my career, which is amazing. It introduced me to incredible people. I met some amazing women and some amazing men through it. It was, and it helped me find my voice and work out who I was and what mattered for me. So I was really incredibly lucky to have done it.
Yeah. Was there anything in particular you took from interviewing so many successful women in leadership?
Probably that nobody ever thinks they are as successful as they actually are. And I don't know if this is definitely a women thing. I don't know how much of it is a people thing generally, but that actually even the most successful women, the women that were really comfortable and confident in themselves, still had a moment where they were like, oh, can I do that? And that actually that was what made them really human and interesting. Also, that the women who had big lives have incredible boundaries and are very in tune with, I think, the piece of kind of cliched life advice that I think is really important, which is it's not your job to make other people like you. It's your job to like yourself enough that it doesn't matter whether other people do or not.
Yeah.
And they had really mastered that. And I think that's amazing.
Yeah. Amazing. No, that is fantastic. I want to touch, if I can, on the importance of failure then, because you mentioned then about perhaps being brave
Mm.
isn't something that maybe always actually certainly maybe a challenge more so for women than men. I mean, I
Mhm.
when it comes to failure, one point that I make whenever I'm asked for a piece of advice is
Mm.
for people to become comfortable or at least familiar with the feeling of failure and to fail more, because every time you fail, not only are you closer to success, which I know sounds a bit gimmicky as a term, but given how many people do give up and fear failure, you're immediately at an advantage. Plus, the more you try, the more you maximize your chances of being lucky. I think lucky plays a huge role in life. So
Absolutely.
I loved there's a reason we chose your quote in your intro about building a safe space in which we can fail. You've delivered a
Mm.
wonderful TED talk, or one of your TED talks is a wonderful story about what yoga taught you about business bravery and bras. For those of our listeners who aren't familiar with that, can you share a bit more detail about that lesson?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, I would say that I was somebody who was brought up to be very, very afraid of failure. So, my parents had their own business, and it was spectacularly brilliant at being very, very bad. I think it managed to go bust about 3 times in my lifetime. We were constantly, it was constantly failing and being reinvented. And they really wanted for their kids, and I think this is part of why it was so important to them that I went to university, really wanted their kids to have safe, steady careers. Neither of us do, so we've both failed there for them. But the message that was drilled from a very young age was you have to work really hard, you have to push as much as you can, and it's not okay to fail. And if you are going to fail at something, it's probably not for you and you shouldn't go and do it. And I had really, really internalized that. And I got to a point, I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and I was putting huge amounts of pressure on myself because I knew that I could not fail. And I was having one of those kind of early midlife crises at that point, as I think a lot of people do. And I had decided that I was going to sort of try and expand my horizons somewhat. And so I came home from work one day and my flatmate said to me, she's like, great news. I have bought us 10 yoga lessons on Groupon. And I was like, I'm not really sure why that's great news, but okay, fine. So they start on Sunday and we're going to go together. I was like, oh, okay, fine. So we went to what I thought was going to be a beginner's yoga class. And in fact, she'd actually bought us 10 classes of advanced power yoga, which, if you do any yoga, is the hardest one.
I think there's a
And
clue in
so,
the title there. I've never done
yeah,
yoga, but power yoga
it's
sounds.
power yoga. There's no quitting in power yoga. And so we're in this class, and I mean, I'm not somebody who looks very attractive when they exercise. You know, I go bright beetroot pink. I was sweating from my head to my toes. It was absolutely awful. I honestly thought I was going to die. And then we got to the point in the class where she's like, okay, ladies, we're going to go into the relaxation mode now. So I want you to lie down on your back. So I was like, oh, thank God. She's like, and then I want you to lift your legs in the air and take a shoulder stand. It's like, you what? Don't be ridiculous. So I'm like lying on my back, my legs in the air, sort of slightly like a kind of beetle on its back or something. And she realizes that I'm not going to be able to get into this shoulder stand. So she comes along, she's like, would you like some help? I'm like, oh, yes, thank you. So she takes me by the ankles and like hauls me into a shoulder stand. And the problem of this is, which, you know, if you are somebody who, as I do, has slightly more than a handful in the boob department, when you are hauled into a shoulder stand, gravity takes over and you basically end up suffocating yourself with your own breasts. So I was there, like in some sort of yoga's equivalent of autoerotic asphyxiation, making these weird kind of snorting noises as I desperately tried to get oxygen, thinking this is just the most horrific thing I have ever done. And the second I am out of this, if I'm not dead, I am never coming back. And I left that class and I was just humiliated. I was like, this is awful. I was so bad at it. And then I don't know what happened, but somehow like childbirth maybe, like over the next 7 days, you just forgot how bad it was. And so we got to the next Sunday and my flatmate was like, should we go again? And in my head I was thinking, well, it just can't have been that bad. You know, I've obviously hyped it up. It just really cannot have been that bad. And so I went back and it was that bad. And it was that bad all over again. And I left the class again. I was like, this is just awful. I can't believe it. It's just awful. And yet I kept going back and I kept going back. And I mean, I've been going back to yoga, I'd say, for sort of 6-7 years now. And I am no better than I was at the beginning. I still can't do a shoulder stand. I'm still, you know, the last one in the class to get into any pose or whatever. But what I found that I really started to enjoy being really bad at something. That actually it was quite freeing to be really terrible at something, and the world hadn't stopped.
Yeah, and not worry about being terrible.
Yeah, and that actually, do you know what? Like, I hadn't been ostracized, you know, that there hadn't been some sort of big sign above my head which said, "Sucks at yoga, don't speak to this woman." You know, it would just life carried on, but here was this thing that I failed at every Sunday. And it gave me this kind of real clarity that actually a lot of the stuff that I had been trying to not fail at maybe wasn't as bad as I thought it was. And maybe if I tried it and I failed at it, it would be okay. And I think that is, you know, there is a sort of hackneyed saying which is like, you know, don't wait till you feel confident, just do it scared. And I think there is actually a lot to be said in that, which is to understand that a lot of the time we teach people you've got to feel really confident, you've got to throw your shoulders back, you know, fake it till you make it. And actually, I sort of feel like what we should be teaching people is you can go and do something really terrified with very little hope for the outcome and surprise yourself. And that's okay. You know, it's okay to go and do something that you are not going to be good at, because you'll learn something anyway, and that is the more interesting part of life, is the learning, really. And you know, as a complete lifetime overachiever and very classic type A personality, it has taken me a long time to realize that actually achieving is less interesting than learning.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I love that. I So I always think about it's the it's the bit before failing and the bit after, they're the most damaging bits, because that bit before is where
Yeah.
people can allow it to completely cripple you into never trying, and the bit
Mm-hmm.
after can potentially destroy people depending on how they bounce back. So there's that phrase "fail fast and move on" is really wise words, but it's very easy to say and very very hard to follow.
And I think also, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm like a stupid optimist, but when I look at the stuff that at the time felt like really horrible, horrible failure and, things that took me maybe years to get over, but I now look at them and I see them as, oh, well, actually, if that thing hadn't happened, I wouldn't have had these 5 other quite good things that came out of it. I mean, I talk about the boyfriend that I broke up with just before I started at The Guardian, he taught me to play poker. And when we broke up, I was completely heartbroken by it. I was devastated for a really long time. And I really internalized that actually that breakup was my fault and I hadn't been good enough and I hadn't tried hard enough and all this, bullshit. And eventually I started to get over it, but I saw it as like, that was such a waste of, I mean, it was nearly 10 years. It was a waste of a really long time. I wasted my 20s on him. It was, And then one day, when I was still working for The Guardian and I'd met this really interesting woman and she sent me an email and she's like, I don't know if you've seen the below, but it's a women's only charity poker tournament. I know you know how to play poker a bit. Thought it'd be quite fun. Do you want to come with me? It's £100 buy-in. And journalism does not pay very well. So £100 at that point was a bit of like, oh, am I going to do it or not? But I was like, sod it, I'm going to do it. So I paid £100 to this charity poker tournament. I thought, I'll meet some interesting people, have a nice night. And I got in there and I realized quite quickly that actually mostly nobody really knew how to play. And then I thought, this is quite good. I've got, I'm in with quite a good chance of winning here, thinking, probably win like a nice bottle of champagne, maybe some flowers. And then about halfway through, they said, we're going to announce the prizes. And they said, third prize was a bottle of champagne. I was like, oh, great. Second prize was this quite nice handbag. I was like, oh, it's getting good. And first prize is a Hermes Birkin bag. And I don't know if you know what a Hermes Birkin bag is, but it's basically 15 grand's worth of handbags.
Jesus.
Yeah. And I was my ears pricked up at that point. And I was like, hang on.
Yeah, I bet they did.
I was like, I've been having a nice time up until now, but now we're taking it seriously. I've been helping all of you, and that's not happening now. And I ended up winning this handbag.
Oh, wow.
And a few years later, I needed 10 grand for a deposit on a flat, and I sold that handbag and I bought my flat. And none of that would have happened had I not dated that guy and had this period of my life that for a long time I'd seen as a failure, but actually it had taught me something that allowed me to buy my own house. And that's the thing, right? Which is, if you have enough distance from the failure, it's going to give you something. It has to. And I really do fundamentally believe that.
Do you ever enter any other tournaments since?
I haven't actually played properly in a while. I mean, I am not a good poker player, which just says how bad everybody else was.
It's all relative.
It is all relative. It's all about picking the opposition, basically.
Oh yeah, funny enough, we actually have a long-term client here at Gasp, and I only found out after about 2 years of working with them that one of the owners of this business was a I was going to say part-time poker player. He's not a part-time. He doesn't do him justice at all. But he regularly wins top prizes in the big US tournaments. And
But I mean, it's very cool.
yeah, it's very cool, but B, the prize money is astronomical in some instances. But he's very unpopular with his family because what he does is they'll go on family holidays around the poker tournaments, and then he literally will sit in a dark room in these often quite seedy, unattractive lounge bars where they host these tournaments. He'll never see the light of day. His family and kids will be off having a wonderful time, and he may or may not come out 50, 60 grand richer plus. But
that's really funny.
yeah, it's a good skill to have.
According to my mum, my grandfather used to do the same thing. So he basically would book them on really nice family holidays, and he'd pay for like the hotel. He had I think he was a stockbroker, he had a good job. So he'd pay for the hotel, but then basically if they wanted to leave the hotel and do anything at any point, it depended on how much he won in the casinos. So the quality of the holiday was entirely dependent upon how well her father did in the casino at night, which is great.
Oh, brilliant. Let's talk about your book then. So you're imminently releasing a book. it will be out at the
Yes.
time we release this podcast. It will probably be maybe 3 weeks away, because I think it's early March it's due to land.
Oh, it's out on the 4th of March, yeah.
It's called Working from Home: How to Build a Career You Love When You're Not in the Office. So, as a freelance journalist and broadcaster for a few years at least, you've been working from home for longer than most of us who are doing it in lockdown. Is that where the idea began, or did it start because of the pandemic?
I have been a massive fan of working from home for years. So I actually started working from home regularly in, I think, about 2006.
Oh, okay.
Very early, because I was working, as I said, for this small website. It was a really small team, so everybody had to do everything. And we were updating the website, and basically the whole project management of it was my job. And I am not naturally a project manager. And it's very being project manager, you have to be really on the details. You have to, be able to read very complicated things that people would send to me, which I didn't understand. And I had a colleague at the time who was a massive chatter. We would just chat all day. And I was like, I can't listen to your chat and also do this. So I sort of said to my boss, I was like, I need to have at least a day a week where I can just sit at home and read and have quiet. And he was actually a very forward thinking guy, and he was like, yep, absolutely fine. And then I realized that actually I could get in the amount of work that it would take me a day to do in the office done in about 4 hours at home. And as somebody who is naturally like quite lazy, I was like, this is amazing. Why is everyone not onto this scheme? And so from then on, I've always like at least worked a little bit from home. And then for the last 2.5 years that I was at The Guardian, I actually worked a 4-day week, but I worked 4 days on full pay, because I said to my boss, I was like, look, I'm in earlier and out later. So I'm actually working more hours in 4 days than I do in 5 anyway. And I don't want to be working the 5th day. And quite frankly, it's pointless me working the 5th day. I'm taking up a space in the office and I'm sitting here brain dead because I worked really hard for 4 days and my brain actually can't do the 5th. And so I think you should just keep paying me my salary, but I'll work 4 days rather than 5. And I had a new boss at this time, and I think she really wanted to be seen as like quite different and adaptable. So she agreed to it. And so I've just always really felt that the concept of being in one place 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, is quite a weird idea. And when I became a coach, one of the things that I loved doing with my clients was actually getting them to sit down and work out, hang on, when am I at my most productive? And how do I gear my working life so that actually those hours when I'm really productive, that's when I work. And I'm not then sitting at my desk staring at my screen for 4 hours trying to get something that, any other time of the day would take 20 minutes done. And I really believe that most of us, if we mapped our energy properly, could have a working life where in about half the time that we spend now, we work, and then the other half the time we've got all this free time to do stuff with. So I've always been a bit of a believer that we have got work wrong. And then in the middle of last year, I was still coaching a lot of people who were going through particularly tough times in the pandemic. So people who were, as you are, homeschooling, looking after kids, trying to hold down full-time jobs, or had suddenly lost their daily routine and didn't know how to cope with it, or perhaps had been furloughed and just didn't know what to do with all the time. What I realized was that actually, and also the flip of that also, which was people who were working from home and had just never stopped working. So they never put down their laptop, and they were working kind of 15, 16 hours a day, and it was just horrible for them. And I realized that actually there was this need for us to understand that, yes, we'd all been forced into working from home, but actually we could have this as an opportunity to trial out the way of working that worked best for us. And then when the pandemic is over, please, hopefully soon, we could go back to the office and say, look, I've just spent 6 months, a year, 18 months, whatever, working in this way. And you can see that I have produced this, and my productivity has been higher because of this, and I am a happier employee because of this. And so this is what I want to have going forward. Because previously, when I've been working with organizations and I'd said to them, have you thought that actually all the proof shows that happier employers are more engaged employees, more productive employees, better for your bottom line. And therefore you should allow people to work from wherever they want to work, however they want to work. And they would go, oh, yeah. Don't know, not sure. And I remember one particular occasion talking to one guy who was sort of bragging about like how flexible he was as a manager and how one of his team worked a 4-day week and she was the most productive member of his team and she brought in the most business. And I said to him, well, like, I suppose then you pay her the most? And he went, oh, well, I mean, she only works 4 days a week. And I said, yeah, but she brings in the most business. So therefore she deserves the most money. And he was like, oh, uh, uh, and so what I actually saw in the pandemic was this chance for all of us to say, let's scrap the rules of work that we have been working towards for the last 100 odd years. It's about 100 years, roughly. Actually, 2021, yeah, probably exactly 100 years because it 9 to 5, 5 days a week was a Henry Ford invention for making motor cars. So it's about 100. We've been working this way for 100 years. Let's scrap that and actually work in a way that works for us. And that's what the book is about. So there's a bit around, how do we stay motivated when we're working from home? How do you set up your working from home life? How do you make sure you're not working all the time? But a lot of it is about how do you find the way of work that works best for you? So that might be you want to work from home full time. But I suspect for most of us, it will be we want to be in the office for a bit, we want to be at home for a bit. For some people, it might be actually want to be in a completely different country. I want to work different hours. I'm really productive at 6 o'clock in the morning. 6 till 8 a.m. I can get through almost a day's work. But ask me to work at about 11 a.m. and I'm pretty brain dead. So actually allowing for that and finding ways to make that work both for individuals and for organizations. And I'm really a bit obsessive and geeky about it. I think it could just change all of our lives and make all of us a lot happier.
Yeah, oh, no doubt. I fully agree once again with everything you've just said. How have you got any advice for how people can map their energy properly? Is it something that's quite intuitive, or is there ways of doing that?
There are lots of ways of doing it. I mean, I think the simplest way is obviously generally the most boring way, which is you get a piece of paper and you write down, the time you wake up and then every hour until you go to bed. And you literally just map your energy on a scale of 1 to 10. So you go, okay, woke up at 7 a.m. and I'm feeling a kind of 5 out of 10. And then at 8 a.m., I actually feel an 8 out of 10. And you look at what have I done between 7 and 8? Well, actually, I woke up, I had a shower, I got dressed, I put the radio on, and I went for a walk outside. And so actually, I'm feeling quite energized by all of that. So then oh, okay, actually, if I'm having a bit of a slump with my energy, probably what I want to be doing is having a shower, go splash my face with some water, go for a little walk outside. And then you go 8 till 9, I'm feeling like this. 9 till 10, I'm feeling like this. And noticing what you did in the intervening hour. And then you really see what gives and what takes away in terms of your energy. So the one that really shocked me was I actually always thought I wasn't really a morning person because I would get to the office and I was always late. I was always late going into the office. My start time was 9 a.m. and it was sort of gradually crept later and later and later until by the end of it was like 10 a.m. I think. I was always late. And it was only when I did this process of mapping my energy, I realized, no, I'm not. I am a morning person. When I wake up, I'm pretty awake and I'm pretty on it. The thing that killed me was sitting on the Piccadilly line for 50 minutes. And when I walked the Piccadilly line, I was still quite upbeat and quite excited. By the time I got off, I was absolutely knackered. And so I thought, actually, well, this is crazy. Why don't I do 4 hours work at home, get on the Piccadilly line when it's really quiet, read my book for 45 minutes, which is very nice, get off, still have loads of energy. Yeah, and you start to see patterns like that. You'll start to notice there are certain people who give you more energy and certain people who take it away. And then you think about, okay, well, if I've got to deal with this person who sucks my energy, I'm going to make sure that I do it maybe towards the end of the day or on a Monday.
You can cope with that impact more then.
Absolutely. You start go, okay, actually, what I notice here is that I've got a really big meeting coming up on Thursday afternoon. And so therefore I know that in order to feel at my best for Thursday afternoon's meeting, I have to do a meeting with this person beforehand that I really like and take the morning off to do some thinking or whatever it is. And when we do that, what happens is we start to feel like we are giving energy rather than that we're having it sucked from us. So it's a kind of choice feeling towards it. And that actually makes us much, much happier with what we're doing when we feel like we're choosing to put our energy into it rather than having it forced from us because it's a must do at that time and place.
And are there any? I suppose it's a bit of a stupid question because I think the answer is going to be probably yes. But does it get more complex the more people you have who are required to
Yeah.
work in some sort of collaboration? So as a manager, controlling, or say controlling, that's a bit
Yeah.
it's
Hmm.
one, but managing other people's or teams of people, obviously you need those overlaps at certain times. So I guess that's probably where it gets more complex.
Absolutely. But what you also start to notice is, and I talk about this a lot in the book, which is the kind of the key criteria for good remote management is trust. So the key criteria is trust. And the more you trust your employees, the more you will get back from them. Because if you think human nature, right? Human nature, we tend to behave better when we feel like we have a level of trust, when we feel like we are trusted. So if you say to your employees, look, however you want to do this is up to you, but by this date, I need this done to this standard in this way, delivered in this manner on this occasion for this person. And you're really clear about what you want from them and you're really clear about when you want it, but you leave it to them to organize how it's going to happen. And maybe you want to set in check-in dates or you want updates, that's fine. But you leave it to them to organize themselves. What you'll find is you get people go, do you know what? I really would rather not work a Tuesday, but I know this is important for the team and I'm part of the team. So I'm going to move that around and I'll make that work. And this person over there going, do you know what? I really am not into the evenings that you want to work, but I'm going to push it and come in because we want to do this together. And that's the kind of culture that you want to create. You want to create a culture where it feels like people feel like they want to lean in because they are rewarded for doing it, because they are part of something bigger than themselves. And the number one way to get rid of that, and the number one way to not have that culture, is to create an atmosphere which is controlling and rigid and based on archaic and mostly quite illogical rules.
Cool. I can see, bizarrely, I can see parallels with my confession is I'm mildly obsessed with pricing models and the need to price based on outputs and outcomes over, inputs, which is essentially man hours in the Henry Ford world. But funny enough, you mentioned that earlier about the boss who you asked if he paid that lady more because of her
Hmm.
output being so much higher. But even this, you're talking about that criteria of trust and managing teams. All of that is based on the outcomes and the outputs and what you want them to achieve, and not how and what they input.
Oh, absolutely. And there's something which is really fascinating to me, which is that the better somebody gets at their job, generally the further away we take them from it. So we go, you're a really great copywriter. So what we want you to do is manage 10 other copywriters. And actually, management is a completely separate skill. And we should be paying people to be managers and we should be paying people to be brilliant at their jobs. And we should understand that really it's about what we create and, as you say, the output of what comes from a team rather than the how it gets done. Because if I'm sitting here saying, well, I think it absolutely has to happen in this way, A, I could be wrong, I could be wrong. B, I could be completely missing out on something. And C, I'm not allowing for anyone else to have a good idea or to have an input or to feel like actually they've got a chance to change and contribute to something. And when we do that, I feel like particularly in the creative industries, quite frankly, particularly in the creative industries where what we say we want is more creativity, we're just sucking the creativity out of it.
Absolutely. I've got a couple of listener questions for you, Harriet.
Oh, exciting.
So, asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger, but we do have two for you. So, Jane asks, do you have, and it's on topic here, so do you have any tips for managers who want to spot signs of loneliness and isolation in their teams without being invasive?
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually talk about this in the book because I think one of the skills that managers have to develop really strongly when you're trying to lead a remote team is the concept of empathy. And empathy, and also a level almost of slightly psychic awareness as to what's going on in your team. So if you're looking for people that might, and was it Jane? Did it come from Jane?
Jane, yes.
I mean, Jane already clearly has levels of empathy because she's asking, how do I spot these signs? So she knows that people are feeling that. But some of the things to just think about and look at. If you've worked with your team for a while, then you probably know their productivity levels. So you know the people that are very organized and will send you stuff and tell you what they're doing and are really communicative. So if they're not doing that, that's something to note. Equally, if you know the people who are a bit lastminute.com, I include myself in that, you know that actually if you've got sort of 3 months of silence from them, they're probably okay, but they're going to do everything at the last minute. So it's about thinking, okay, well, what is different in our communication patterns from usual? So are emails shorter? Are people quieter on calls? Are people not responding to you as quickly? What we're looking for are kind of almost the classic signs of burnout, because one of the symptoms of burnout is a lack of engagement. So anything where people perhaps are not performing to the level that they usually do, they are not responding to you in the way that they usually would, they are taking longer to reply than they usually would, or perhaps they are less engaged or less forthcoming in group situations. That is the stuff where I would be looking to say, it feels like something is not quite right here. And then you have a kind of management issue where if you are a deeply empathetic person, you probably want to bowl right in there and be like, what's going on? Are you okay? Talk to me. And if you're more of a thinker, you're like, oh my God, there's something wrong and it's an emotional thing. And oh God, what are we going to do with them? And actually, the key is to really find that middle ground. So to open the space which says, hey, I've noticed that you're a bit quieter than usual. I'm just checking in. Are you okay? Is there anything I can support you with? And leaving that space for them to either say, no, I'm fine, or to say, actually, this is going on for me right now. And then as your manager, understanding that your job is absolutely not to fix them. And as humans, we want to fix a lot, right? So we want to be like, okay, you've told me the problem. Great. Or perhaps they haven't told you the problem. They've said, yeah, I'm fine. But it's really clear that they're not. And so we go, okay, well, have you thought about trying this? And what do you do about this? And how are you with this? And we could try this. Actually, leave the space for them to tell you what's going on or not as they wish. And just hold that space. Say, I'm here for you anytime you want to talk. It's a tough time for all of us right now. I don't know about you. I am feeling disengaged, a bit lonely, missing my colleagues, whatever it is. So just know you're not alone. We're all here for you. I'm here for you when you need me. And that's the level of management. I don't know that management is the appropriate word for this, but it's the level of people skills that we need to get to, right? We need to understand that mostly what people want is space, time to talk, to be heard, and to be allowed to feel whatever they're feeling without somebody throwing suggestions at them as to how to get out of it, because they will get themselves out of it in their own time. The coaching course that I did many years ago has a saying, and it says, people are naturally resourceful, creative, and whole. And so our job is not to fix them, because people have that resource, they have that creativity, they have that wholeness, but they just might be going through a bit of a tough time right now. And what they want probably more than anything is to be heard and to know that it's not just them.
Yeah, you're right to clarify as well that it's a people skill. It doesn't really it's irrelevant of any kind of hierarchy of job status. It's not necessarily solely management at all.
Absolutely. No, I mean, right now, more than anything, I think we're all really appreciating colleagues. So you can do that at any level and for anyone. But actually, I think as part of management, we need to realize that being able to just hold that space for our team and say, here's a safe space for you to feel like you're failing a little bit, or to actually feel like things are not going okay. And that's okay. You're not going to get fired. I'm not going to bring it up in your next appraisal. You can have a bad day, and that is okay.
Good answer. Question 2 then is from Danny. Danny says, of all the ways COVID has changed our ways of working, post-pandemic, which is the one thing you hope is here to stay, and one thing you'd like to give the boot?
Oh, that's a great question. The one thing I hope is here to stay is I think that COVID has allowed us to see each other as people a little bit more. I think it's given us an understanding of some of the trials and tribulations that we go through as humans. And that's the stuff that creates empathy within us. So, sort of weirdly, like being on conference calls with people and hearing their kids having a massive row in the background, or being on conference calls with people and realizing it's just them in their house. Actually, we start to see different sides of people. And I have one colleague actually that I talk about in the book, and how, I found it when I started working with this company, I found it really hard to relate to her. And we worked entirely in the pandemic, so I've never met her in person. And I couldn't quite get a feel for her until one day I realized that in the back of her Zoom call was this really beautiful chest of drawers, and it was really interesting and intricate and delicate. And I asked her about it, and we ended up having this fantastic conversation about furniture. And I really saw her as a human being. And that glimpse into people's actual lives and allowing us to see them as humans rather than the people that we work with, I think that is a real gift. And I would like us to be able to keep some of that. In terms of what I would happily leave behind, I mean, obviously the global pandemic itself, but in terms of the kind of work context of it, I would say that working from home during a pandemic is not the same as working from home. It's not. Particularly if you're a working parent, but for all of us. All of us are at, a kind of zero on the resilience level scale right now. Nobody really has the capacity to give much more than we already are. And so I think there is a collective feeling of being drained, and a collective feeling of actually, the small stuff really mattering right now, whereas usually we might be able to brush it off. And I would love us to leave that collective feeling of being drained and slight hopelessness. I would love us to leave that behind in the pandemic and realize that actually, if we got through that, we will get through other things too.
Good answers, Harriet. The final part of our interview is our 4 pertinent posers that we put to all of our guests.
Ooh.
And they are: number 1, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I mean, the classic one that I always say here is proceed until apprehended. And
I love that line. I've seen it on your TED Talk. It's a great line.
it's really good. It's really good. It was great advice. And honestly, I mean, I think I had a lot of fun in my youth, but I think I might have had even more fun if I'd known about that. I think also I would tell her that, I mean, there's so much stuff you'd want to. I obviously would tell her you're not as fat as you think you are. Definitely. I would tell her that all that stuff that she thinks really, really matters right now, you literally won't remember it. You will one day find your 17-year-old diary in your mum's wardrobe, and you'll read it and you'll be like, who are these people? I don't remember them. And so, yes, it's okay to feel it really deeply right now, but know that it won't feel like this forever.
Going back to your proceed until apprehended line, it's absolutely brilliant. I love it. I've written it down by my Mac here, but
Thank you.
it actually reminds me of when I was at Kingston University doing my foundation diploma type thing, pre-degree. I had one of the most life-changingly amazing tutors called Chris Draper, and what made him so good is he was actually a practicing, creative, I suppose, which is a bit of a wanky word,
Yeah.
but he was mostly a photographer, and he used to show us some of his photos, and they would be of places that even at the relatively tender age of about 18, you knew he shouldn't have access to because there was heavily secured areas. And he used to just say, he said, just wear a high-vis jacket. If you wear a high-vis jacket, you just walk anywhere you like and no one challenges you.
That is amazing advice. I love that.
And it's so true. If you see, it's amazing. You see someone in a high vis, you assume they're meant to be there, and he knew that.
Absolutely. That's brilliant. I'm going to get one tomorrow.
Yeah, do it. Number 2, if you could banish one thing from your industry, what would it be and why?
I would banish. Okay, so I've probably got 2. So I would banish overconfidence. So I'd banish anyone that says I'm a 10 out of 10 on the confidence scale here. Like, what? No. I think it's great to feel competent. It's great to feel like you can do it. It's great to feel like you want to do it. Anyone that tells me they've definitely got this, I'm like, boring. So I find that level of overconfidence very, very dull. So I would banish that. And then the other thing I might also banish, and I say this as somebody who was one, and so I'd have to banish myself here, I might banish private school kids, because I think we bring a lot of that overconfidence to the industry, and we are our own worst enemy. So I one of the things that I've really, the older I get, the more uncomfortable I feel with it, is that we can buy not just education, but then also the rest of the life. And I feel uncomfortable with that, so I might banish that. But I'd have to banish myself at the same time, so yeah.
Number 3, aside from working from home, obviously, which we will link to in this episode's listing, are there any books that you could recommend to our listeners?
So I am currently reading When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate, and I would thoroughly recommend that. Or just just be prepared to be completely terrified and have to rethink your whole life. It's literally giving me nightmares at the moment, but it is amazing. It's all about the mind-body connection. And also on that theme, I would recommend The Body Keeps the Score, which was a book I read probably about 10 years ago, and it completely changed my view on our bodies, but also how we process and look after them, how we process stress, and how we create empathy and understanding for other people. So those two I think everyone should read. And then, I mean, just for sheer joy, my favourite book is probably Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier, and I wish more people had read it so I could talk about it with them.
Good stuff. Okay. And then, so number 4 is we always dedicate every episode to someone, and we bestow or hospital pass that honour, depending on your view, to our guest, who has to give their reason why. So would you kindly dedicate this episode?
I will dedicate this episode to... Oh, do you know how I'm gonna this is soppy. I don't know if this is okay, but it's not famous.
Soppy works.
I am gonna dedicate it to my best friend's mum, who is a nurse, and she retired from nursing in September, and she has gone back so that she can lead her former surgery's COVID vaccination drive. And I think she's awesome, so I'm dedicating it to her.
Amazing. Oh, that's amazing. Are we allowed to have first name?
Yep, Di. She's brilliant. Love her. Yeah, it's dedicated to Di.
Amazing. This episode is very proudly dedicated to Di then. That sounds incredible. What a woman. As a final call to action, everyone can head over to this episode's listings. We'll share links to everything discussed, including Harriet's imminent new book. When the Body Says No, The Body Keeps the Score, Jamaica Inn. How else can people get more Harriet Minter?
You can find me on all the usual social medias at Harriet Minter. You can email me, and that's totally fine. Although I do appreciate that if I don't get back to you anytime soon, it's not personal, it just takes me a while. harriet.minter@gmail.com. And yeah, you can buy the book, which I would be delighted if you did. It's out on the 4th of March, but I have to say, pre-orders are great because Amazon, horror that it is, will only promote your book if you get enough pre-orders. So if you wanted to pre-order it, that would make me so happy.
Fantastic. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great, Harriet. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, I've loved it. Great questions. Thank you so much for giving me the time.
Finally, thank you to everyone listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do share and review the pods. Keep questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's easy to find Gasp online. You can check out CTA Pod on Instagram, or just email hello@calltoaction.co.
Can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try.